who'd like to call the meeting back to order? Mr. Meng, you're on item 9. I believe you had 3 slides left.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Investment Committee. Now let's continue with the discussion on item 9, mitigating drawdowns. The slide, please. So just follow on what Mr. Bailey just presented to us. He touched upon drawdown again. And now let's do a quick review. What are the undesirable things or outcome would happen in a drawdown? As I said, one, we run out of money, we cannot pay our bills. And the other one is that we don't have money to take advantage of market dislocation normally presented during time of crisis. So that's number 1 and 2. And to mitigate that, our plan is to develop a plan. And we can mitigate the impact of number 1, number 2. Number 3 and 4, the undesirable outcomes is we cannot maintain our desired risk profile, or we become panic and then we sell assets that at the worst time possible. To prevent that from happening, once we have developed a plan, let's stick to the plan. So that's the key takeaway point. Develop a plan now and then stick to the plan during the crisis. So this slide we covered already, and this just highlight what not to do during the crisis on the right is equally important as what to do during the crisis. Since we shouldn't do during crisis, 1, we should not succumb to common investment behavioral biases. And 2, we should not allow a deviation from predetermined plan without a very strong justification. We're not saying that once we have a plan set in stone, we have to mechanically, draconically follow the plan regardless what the future is. But to change a plan, we have to have a pretty strong justification why we are changing the plan. So this is my last slide. It's really a poster in my office for those of you who have been in my office recently. This is actually a gift to me from Marcy and the executive team to welcome us coming back, which is keep calm and carry on. And somehow my dear esteemed executive colleagues expected Walter will be a rough sea ahead of the investment office, the markets. And the reason we can keep calm because we have been anticipating and preparing ourselves for a drawdown. So when the drawdown actually comes, it won't be a surprise to us. So that's the reason we can keep calm. And the other reason we can carry on is again because we have a plan and we know that we have a plan that's developed or encompass all possible different scenarios. Well, I shouldn't say all possible different scenarios that we can, which I should have said all the scenarios we can think of. We have a plan that covers all the scenarios. Then we just carry on the plan. So again, it's to develop a plan to prepare ourselves before the crisis comes, and then stick to the plan during the crisis. And with that, we can mitigate the impact of a drawdown, not to completely eliminate the impact of a drawdown. So with that, we're open for questions.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Paquin.
Thank you. I had a question about a comment you made earlier in the presentation where you said something along the lines of maybe possibly changing the policies, investment policies, to be able to react a little bit more quickly in that kind of situation. Just curious what kind of an example of a change that would be.
Yes, a very good question. So, for example, look at one of the things, one of the undesirable outcome during a drawdown. Second is that we don't have money to deploy to take advantage of market dislocation. And one of the ways to generate additional liquidity is put on leverage on the total fund. So we borrow money. That will affect our total fund leverage policy. And so currently, as we are developing emergency plan, we're looking into the potential impact on the total fund leverage policy. And it may impact the total fund risk policy as well. So that we don't know yet. As we are developing the plan, we'll discover more and more, and we plan to come back to you to ask you for if there's any policy change.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ortega.
Thank you. My question may be for Marcy as much as for Ben, but it's about how the plan will then lead to maybe a communications plan and kind of a strategy for being ready for the pressure that will come from the outside. So when you have the crisis, there's a lot of pressure. What are you doing? What are you doing? And there's an expectation that you're doing something different rather than doing what exactly you had in your plan. So I just kind of want to hear what your thinking is on that.
So the way that we do most of the work around, whether it's in the investment office or if it's the liability side with Scott Tarando and his team, is once they have landed on the analysis, that it then gets presented to this board. But we also bring in public affairs at that time to create communication materials. And then our stakeholder engagement team will go out and meet directly with stakeholders. We meet with them on a regular basis, both with the employer roundtable, actually all three, the employer roundtable, the labor roundtable, and then we do a retiree roundtable. And so our public affairs office will help us create communication materials that can be shared in those venues. But it will start with, in this case, the investment team working with us in public affairs, and then through the board and through these various channels out to the stakeholder groups.
Yeah, so that's a very good observation, great question from you. So as you see this slide, we specifically calling your partnership, and not just this board, it's all the stakeholders, so that we develop the plan together, we own the plan together. As I said, that one of the famous, I believe is Republican lawmaker, many years ago said something really stuck with me. He said that if you want me to be with you in landing, make sure you include me in taking off, right? So all the stakeholders, when the crisis comes, we're all human. We have the tendency to succumb to a number of behavioral biases. So the more we can bring the stakeholders along with us and keep them informed that as we develop the plan, share with them the plan as much as we can, so that all the stakeholders will stick with us and support the plan during the crisis. So your question or comment is a very good one, that we do need to have a communication plan alongside with the investment plan to prepare ourselves for the next drawdown.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Yes, I wanted to thank Ms. Ortega for asking that question, because those are one of my concerns as well. I just want to make sure, and Ben, you sort of answered the question already, but I just want to make sure as we are coming up with these decisions, our plans, that at each stage of the strategy, we are involving communications, so that we have a broader strategy for that communications. It's always been my concern that we don't tell our story well enough, and I want to make sure that we get our story out there, because we're going to be scaring a whole lot of folks when we're talking about drawdowns, and it's very important that we get the whole story out there first before everyone else does.
Yes.
Thanks, Ben.
Ms. Middleton?
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate the plan. I think we're going forward in a very good direction. But we need to start that communication now and not when the drawdown occurs. And one feature of that clearly needs to be a very candid discussion of why we are in a better condition to deal with the drawdown this time than we were in 2008 and 2009, and that includes complete candor around what happened in 2008 and 2009.
So one of the communication products that we put together, because we were getting a lot of questions from the employer community, the member community, around the discount rate change, the change in the amortization. So we put together what's called the Solid Foundation for the Future report. I could see us, phase 2, as Scott's coming in November with the risk report, primarily on the liability side, that this would feed into another piece similar to the Solid Foundation for the Future. And then we would go out and stakeholder that like we did that report. So I went out and did an employer tour, we did a media tour, did a legislative tour, did a stakeholder tour, making sure that everyone understood what we were thinking about in that moment. And today is the first presentation that Ben has done on drawdown risk, and that will kick these next series of events off.
Ms. Pascal Rogers?
I want to just thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really want to thank Mr. Meng and Ms. Ross for this opportunity. It was learning experience, but it also freaks the heck out of me when I think about the curve and everyone's still smiling. But I really appreciate preparedness, and I really appreciate kind of the opportunity to you speak and then this report in November. I agree with everybody. I think we need to be really robust and maybe not wait till November, but maybe do little tidbits of communications out to groups because, we just don't know what we don't know. And the more we even get out there, even just in newsletters, in your meetings, but something that even can be online for employers and members, legislators, all the stakeholders, I think will help familiarize themselves. Because like myself, it's not going to be one time looking at the video. I'm going to need to pay attention, and it'll be a few times. And so I really appreciate today, but think it'd be really helpful for us to just every month maybe have something. Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you. I just also want to echo what my colleagues have said to thank you, the staff, for executing the decision by the Investment Committee in 2016, 2017 to get us to this point. Because as I recall, when we were debating and discussing these elements, we were getting pushback then that that's not the right thing to do, but here you are. If we had not taken these steps, we would not be in the same position that we are today. So I just want to thank staff for that. Also, the communication piece, for example, last year when we had a fiscal year return of 8.6%, I had several calls being the chair of the investment committee at the time. Well, why did you only have 8.6 and X pension fund had 10 and another pension fund had 9? And I said, well, what's their funded status? Oh, they were 100% funded. I say, there it is. When you're that well funded, you could take more risk. And so we were funded at the time, back in 16, at 61%. We could not take the risk, and you've highlighted many of those elements today. So we need to keep letting people know that you can't just compare a number. You got to look at under the hood, if you will, to understand why you are making those kind of returns based on your financial condition. So thank you very much for making this happen.
Good point. Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, thank you again, Mr. Meng, and all the work that's gone into this from staff and everything. It's really appreciated. And I would just also, as Henry did, echo my colleagues' concerns that the communication of this is going to be a big challenge, I think, for us organizationally, for each of us as board members. And for me, one of the biggest parts of that challenge is it's challenging enough for me to keep my focus on that long-term time horizon of a long-term strategic investor being, 30, 50 years out, when all the pressures and all the perspectives of most of the folks I talk to, our members, our stakeholders, are much shorter timeframes for their decision-making, their political survival, just the changes and coming and going of leadership in, state and municipal government, all those things that are on these much shorter time scales. So to the extent we can try to find the commonalities of messaging to try to make this relevant to them in the present day, to help them understand our long-term perspective, trying to look forward and recognize the kind of dramatic changes in the marketplace. I mean, changes that just in the few years since I was a grad student, it's like, wow, never would have ever guessed or predicted some of the kinds of changes and where we are today, that the pressure from them is often just from the rear view mirror. It's like, why weren't you guys in Bitcoin? Kind of stuff that we get. So great job, and going forward, the more that you can provide us in terms of help, resources and information and packaging and messaging so we can kind of speak with one voice will be really, really helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Ma?
Thank you very much. And I would agree. And also, I don't know if your presentation is on the website, but along with the presentation, I would also put the video of Ben speaking, because sometimes, reporters will go, oh my God, draw down. And then they just look at a slide, but, the better ones will actually take time and listen, to your presentation, because sometimes what looks like, what's on a slide may not be exactly what the interpretation is. So I would say, for any of these tough issues, when they happen and people get alarmed and, reporters call, it's best to keep the video also along with the PowerPoint. But good job, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Perez.
Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. And everyone up here is absolutely right, but I want you to focus on the happy face and let Marcy and her team worry about the outreach.
Deal. I'm not sure that's a good deal for Marcy, though, but it's a deal for me.
All right. Seeing nothing else, anything else on item 9, Mr. Meng?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us back to item 8, action agenda item asset allocation.
Yeah, members of the investment committee. So as I said in my opening remarks, this is the action item. It's about the California employer pre-funded retirement plan. It's a newest addition to our affiliated program. So I have my colleagues here getting situated on the dais.
Okay, if we're ready to begin, I'm Eric Baggeson, part of the CalPERS staff and responsible for our trust level portfolio management team. Agenda item 8A has been mentioned as an action item. This is consistent with the other asset allocation related items that we brought for the affiliate funds really over the past year or so. The item will be presented in large measure by Christine Reese, who is one of the team members in the global equity area. And Christine is the person responsible for really maintaining the asset allocation structure within the affiliate funds. And we also have Allison Lee, who's a team member in trust level portfolio management. We've also joined by Andrew Junkin from Wilshire Associates, if there's any questions for Wilshire in relation to this. And there is a Wilshire opinion letter that is attached to the actual agenda item. The pension pre-funding trust is in essence really almost a defined contribution plan for employers that elect to basically make additional contributions in anticipation of potential eventual contributions that will be need to be made to the pension fund. This was set up by legislation. It was Senate Bill 1413 that took effect in January 1st of this year. We have committed to starting up the pre-funding trust as of July 1st of this year, the start of the new fiscal year. The material that you've seen before you has actually also been reviewed by what is known as our Asset Liability Management Committee. And the Asset Liability Management Committee is a partnership that exists between the Finance Office, the Actuarial Office, and the Investment Office to really review all of these asset allocation related items. And consistent with a lot of the comments that we just heard, the public affairs people also participate in that Asset Liability Management Committee made up of, as I say, an array of the staff members. And I think, as again, reinforcing that this is an action item, and at this point I think I will turn it over to Christine Reese, who I think carries the first part of the material.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Christine Reese, CalPERS team member. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of all of the CalPERS team members that have contributed to the launch of this trust. It's been a great team effort across many areas of CalPERS over the last 6 months. Regarding the presentation, I'll begin with an overview of the trust and some of the characteristics we take into consideration when developing an investment program. I'll turn it over to Allison to discuss the asset allocation and our recommendation for the portfolios. And then I'll finish the presentation with covering off on a few additional investment components. So starting on page 3, Eric covered some of this in terms of the legislation, but the California Employers Pension Pre-Funding Trust was created in response to rising pension costs over the next several years. The specific purpose of the trust is to allow state and local public agency employers that offer a defined benefit plan the ability to pre-fund their required pension payments and invest those payments into a trust. The type of trust is a Section 115. It's the same type of trust we currently utilize for the CEPPT, which is another affiliate investment program. So it's a very well understood structure. It will be exempt from taxes. It will have a single governmental purpose to pre-fund pension contributions. The contributions and earnings are irrevocable, which means that once they're in the trust, once the contributions are in, once the earnings have been credited to the trust, they can only be withdrawn for two purposes. One, to pre-fund pension payments, to pay pension contributions. The other would be to terminate, but only transfer to another qualified trust with the same purpose. A couple of additional items to note are that trust participants don't necessarily need to be CalPERS pension participants. They could have their own defined benefit program and still be eligible to participate in the CEPPT. And employers are not required to participate in the trust. Contributions and participation are fully voluntary. So when developing an investment program, looking at page 4, we want to understand the potential benefits and alternatives to really best align the investment program with the employer goals and to not replicate options that employers may already have available to them. So CalPERS teams worked with the employers to gain an understanding of how they anticipate using the trust. And a primary goal for employers, as costs rise, is to stabilize their budget and smooth out their pension payments over the next several years. So participation in this trust would provide them with diversified investments with a strategic asset allocation. Many of the employers would have an established relationship with CalPERS, either through the pension program or potentially through the CEPPT program. And we are a low-cost provider of this type of product. When looking at alternatives, employers do have several alternatives. A few on the investment side are that they can manage their own investments. They can also participate in the state-offered local agency investment fund. Both of those options are very short-term, very conservative. They could contribute directly to the PERF. That's a long-term investment, but that doesn't necessarily help them in terms of smoothing out their upcoming pension payments. There are other pre-funding trust providers, so we know it's a valued product. And then, as a last resort, employers could decrease services and increase taxes. When we look at the investment options that employers currently have, they have options on the short term and the very long term. So when we looked at setting up this trust, we wanted to target something in the middle. And Allison will speak more to that in the asset allocation component. Diving into some projected characteristics of the trust, we've already spoken about the participants. One thing I would like to call out is that the state of California, if they choose to participate, they could be a very large participant, which would take the assets under management potentially to a pretty large size in the trust. At this time, we don't have an indication that they'll participate soon, but potentially in 2019, later in the year. Cash flows for the trust will be unpredictable. As they're voluntary, they will vary in size as well as timing. And the time horizon, in working with the employer community, we learned that their time horizon is kind of short to medium, and the risk tolerance, the associated risk tolerance, is low to moderate. Based on that feedback and with the difficulty of meeting those goals with one option, we determined it would be best to offer two options for employers to have a choice. And then in terms of the use of funds, because there are restrictions in the distributions, we don't expect large outflows in the early stages of the trust. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Allison to review the asset allocation and our recommendation for the portfolios.
Microphone, please.
Sorry. Good morning. This is Allison Lee, CalPERS investment staff. I will discuss the strategic asset allocation for CEPPT. So when we conduct our strategic asset allocation analysis, we are under the guidance of our investment beliefs. In particular, investment beliefs number 1, which is liabilities must influence asset structure. But in the case of CEPPT, the purpose is actually to pre-fund the future required pension contributions. So both the contribution and the withdrawal are under the control of participants. So in this case, the cash flow is not determined directly by pension liabilities. Instead, it's determined by the budgeting considerations of its participants. So rather, as a result, in lieu of liabilities, pension characteristics are the determinants of our asset allocation considerations. So since CEPPT is a new trust, we do not have data from the yet-to-come participants. But it's reasonable to expect the participants will come from the same pool as those of the CEPPT, because those are the ones and the state with the financial resources to pre-fund their pension contributions. And they have established a long-lasting, trusting relationship with CalPERS. And our internal administrator for CEPPT, who will also administrate the CEPPT trust, have had extensive discussions with those potential participants to gauge their investment goals, investment time horizon, and risk tolerance. Another source of information is to survey the participants who have already set up similar pre-funding trust with private providers. So combining the two sources of information, we believe potential CEPPT participants have the following characteristics. So first, their contribution to and distribution from the trust are voluntary. Both the timing and amount are uncertain and varied. This character requires a less liquid and less risky portfolio because the fund should be at relatively ready at any time for withdrawal, and it has less ability to remain invested during the drawdown periods. Investor time horizon and risk tolerance are two characters that can either be closely related or be different. If we do not know anything about the investor, then we would expect an investor with short time horizon to have low risk tolerance, which will indicate a lower risk portfolio. On the other hand, the investor can choose its risk tolerance based on its own unique circumstances, no matter what its investment time horizon. So based on our information resources, we think the investment time horizon for CEPPT participants are from short to medium. Because the purpose of CEPPT is actually to temper the contribution volatility in the next several years and to mitigate the sharp increase in required contribution in the next 10 plus years, which is expected to level off afterwards. Besides, it's actually to participants' advantage to contribute the funds directly into PERF if their time horizon for the utilization of the fund is in the long term. So lastly, investor risk tolerance for CEPPT participants is estimated to be low to medium, and this is consistent with the purpose of the CEPPT trust, consistent with the discussions we have had with potential participants and consistent with their investment horizon, and also consistent with the choices some of those participants have made with other providers. So in summary, the characteristics of the CEPPT participants indicates low to medium risk portfolios. Thank you. So the process to obtain policy portfolios for affiliate trust mirrors it to the extent possible of the PERF asset liability management workshop. So the first step in the process is to establish capital market assumptions, which defines the risk and return profile of each asset class and determines the composition of candidate portfolios. So the capital market assumptions for CEPPT has been established for 2019, and this follows the process we used for the 2017 asset liability management workshop. There's only three differences. So first, for the fixed income and treasury inflation-protected securities, they only include U.S. securities, which is consistent with other affiliate trusts. And also for the fixed income, the benchmark is the aggregate index, which is different from PERF, which is customized to have a longer duration. The shorter duration here is consistent with the investment horizon of the CEPPT participants. And also for the global real estate investment trusts, the CMA is estimated using the internal dividend discount model. So this table shows the CMA's asset class correlations and the constraints. So minimum exposures are put on both tips and rates to increase the diversification in the portfolio. So this slide is the outcome of the first step, and it's also the input to the second step. So the second step in the process is to utilize mean variance optimization techniques to build the efficient frontier. So each portfolio resides on the efficient frontier is efficient in the sense that they have the highest expected return compared to all feasible portfolios with the same expected risk. So all the portfolios below and to the right of the efficient frontier are inefficient, while all the other portfolios above and to the left of the efficient frontier are not feasible. So here we pick the 5 portfolios as candidate portfolios, and their risk-return profiles are displayed in the next slide. So here we show the composition of the 5 candidate portfolios, and we also showed their volatility as measured by annual standard deviation and expected annual returns, which is net of the 25 basis points administrative fees. So referring to our investment beliefs number 9, that risk to CalPERS is multifaceted and cannot be just measured by standard deviation and tracking error. So in addition to standard deviation, we also estimated the 95 percentile value at risk using the Barra integrated model and the Monte Carlo techniques. So for example, we estimate at the 95% level of confidence, the maximum loss to portfolio 1 within 1 year is not going to exceed 4%. So aided by the information on this slide, this is the third step of the process, we evaluate candidate portfolios to recommend policy portfolios. So a conservative portfolio is recommended for CEPPT strategy 2 to accommodate shorter investment horizon and lower risk tolerance. We recommend portfolio number 2, which has 4% expected return, 5.2% expected volatility, and we can say with 95% level of confidence that the maximum loss will not exceed 5.3% within 1 year. We This is portfolio 2 is preferred to portfolio 1, which has very low expected returns, similar to a bond reserve portfolio. And also at the left end of the efficient frontier, the slope is very steep, so it pays to take on some extra risk. A moderate portfolio is recommended for CEPPT Strategy 1 to accommodate medium investment horizon and also medium risk tolerance. So staff proposed portfolio 4, which has 5% expected return and 8.2% expected volatility. Again, we can say with 95% level of confidence that the maximum loss to portfolio 4 within 1 year is not going to exceed 11%. It's preferred to portfolio 3 because portfolio 3 doesn't offer enough difference from portfolio 2. And it's also preferred to portfolio 5 because portfolio 5 has too higher volatility, which is not advised for an investor with low to medium investment horizons and low to medium risk tolerance. So now I'll turn over to Christy again to discuss the implementation of our recommendations.
Before you go forward, we have a question. Mr. Jones?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is great. I think it's great. It's another step towards sustaining our long-term benefits for our members throughout the state. And certainly, we hope that agencies would take advantage of it. I do have a question. It indicates irrevocable for contributions and earnings to the trust. My question is irrevocable to who? For example, we had agencies that stopped paying into the fund. We had to terminate them from CalPERS, or an agency may go bankrupt. So are these funds irrevocable to the members or to the institution that's providing them?
I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that the irrevocable is to the employer in terms of once the money is in the trust, it's there for a very specified purpose to go into the pension plan. So they can't pull it out, say, to use it for their general fund.
But
does that answer the question?
Not really.
Okay.
Let's say that the agency, like we had with a couple, they stopped paying in, so now it's affecting the members who the monies were being placed in the fund for. So they stop paying, we have to terminate them from the system.
If I may, I think your question is, this fund actually doesn't affect our relationship, our contracting relationship between CalPERS and the agencies. Mm-hmm. That relationship is the same. If they cannot pay, then we'll go through bankruptcy. This is just to help them to manage their contribution in the next few years. Mm-hmm. So they have to budget how to come up with the contribution, mm-hmm. to pay the required contribution. And so this is just a tool. They could have saved some money like this year and let this money grow at 5%. After 5 years, they can use this money to pay for the contribution. Or the contribution has to come from other ways. This doesn't affect their contractual obligation with CalPERS.
Yeah.
So we've brought up Arnita Page, who works in our contracts area, to assist.
Good morning. It's Arnita Page, CalPERS team member. I want to make sure I understood your question. What I thought I heard you say was, what happens if this plan is terminated? They no longer contribute? I just want to make sure. Okay. Because this is a voluntary program, those funds, if the employer decided, I don't want to participate anymore, they can either transfer those funds to another 115 trust, or they can pay towards the trust itself. So what it means to be dedicated is those funds are dedicated for future pension obligations.
That's what I was trying to get
Okay.
to. Yeah, thank you very much.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
because otherwise, it's irrevocable, like you said, that they go bankrupt, they take the money out of the trust, it helps solve their bankruptcy problem, but you answered my question. It's protected.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Trying to figure out how to ask this in a coherent way, but I'm kind of interested if you could speak a little bit to kind of what it looked like when you looked at what the distribution you would expect in terms of the potentially participating employers in terms of strategy 1 versus strategy 2, and how that played into offering a choice of 2 strategies versus kind of 1 strategy, versus 2 that would have smaller numbers of participants, scale, costs, whatever. Did they kind of come out as kind of a bimodal distribution, or were they just spread out and you wanted to put something at either end to try to cover all of them more optimally than kind of a midline kind of approach?
I think I'll take that question. What we did in February and March, we actually went out and performed workshops at our regional office to gain an understanding of what employers were looking for. And what we heard was some they were extra conservative, moderate, and then some employers who wanted something a little bit more aggressive. So when we go back to when we implemented our CERP program, we offered 1 investment strategy, and then later through the years we added 2 additional. We thought that for this particular program, because we were trying to offer a product that was for the entire population that we're hearing from, we thought the 2 investment strategies would work better. Because what we heard was moderate, low-cost program, but with the option of a more risk-adverse and then a little slightly higher risk. So that's why we recommended these 2 strategies.
Mr. Perez.
Ma'am, you just mentioned low cost, and I saw on the footnote, the cost of this is 25 basis points for
Yes.
a participant?
Correct.
And I think I heard you say that it makes more sense for a participant just to add money into the PERF as opposed to setting up a 115?
No, for the case if their investment, the horizon for utilization of the fund is in the long term. Like when they have extra amount of money, they can consider whether to contribute to CEPPT or the PERF. If they are going for the long term, it's to their advantage to contribute into PERF. But if they want to have the ability to utilize this money exclusively for the short term, then it's better to contribute to CEPPT.
Okay.
Maybe I can help a little bit, Mr. Perez. If they're trying to just improve their funded ratio, they should contribute to the PERF. But if they're trying to stabilize their budget, then it's better to be in this because this will allow them to stabilize their budget. Does that
perfect,
help?
thanks.
Okay.
And then can the participants switch between strategies at all? Or once you pick 2, you're committed to 2?
We're allowing the versatility of them being able to participate in both strategies. And yes, I want to make sure, was your question?
So I'm the city and I invest in number 2.
Okay.
I'm the city and I invest in 2, and let's say down the road 3 years later I want to go to 3, 4. Can I do that?
Well, we're recommending 2 strategies. To repeat the question, let's say you investment. Go ahead.
He just wants to know whether they can transfer from one.
Yes, they can. They can transfer. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
Ms. Paquin.
Thank you. Just curious, how does the allocation and the estimated returns and the fees compare to other 115 trust providers?
The information that we have available to us on other providers is limited, but the 25 basis points is lower than other providers. It looks like other providers are north of 40 basis points. And once the trust is up and running, we will look to review the fees on an annual basis and look to reduce them where we can once our startup costs are behind us.
Okay, and as far as the asset allocation, is that similar to the others?
The asset allocation, so one provider offers 5 different choices from very conservative to very aggressive. It appears that most of the participants are choosing more on the conservative side of those choices.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Middleton.
Yes. What are your plans for rolling out an educational campaign to municipalities on this program, most particularly to finance directors and city managers in the cities?
Well, I'll take that question. I mentioned earlier that we started our workshops in February. What we do plan is to continue our workshops. They're actually for employers to sign up on our web starting in August through November. So we do go out and we do talk about the program. We also plan to do like mailing flyers to our current employers, as well as at the employer forum. We'll also be advertising there for the program as well.
And the other thing that we'll do, we talked about this at the employer roundtable, is that the employers are willing to help market this program as well. So we'll get them a kit that they can use.
All right, thank you.
Great, seeing no other requests, please continue.
Thank you. So page 11 shows the recommended benchmarks. These benchmarks are broad market-based indices. These are in use for other affiliate funds, so they're very well understood. Won't spend much time more on those. Page 12 shows our recommended asset class ranges. What these show is, for each asset class, how much that asset class can move from its target before triggering a portfolio rebalance. So in our investment program, we rebalance portfolios on a quarterly basis. This will reduce any sort of mid-cycle frequency and costs around rebalancing. This also facilitates contribution and distribution activity. In terms of the liquidity, we don't have a target for liquidity, but we do have a range of +2%, and that allows for cash moving into and out of the portfolio as participants contribute and withdraw. So before I go on to the final slide, I just would like to also mention the investment policy, which is provided as attachment 2. The policy has been modeled from other affiliate trusts. It's been updated for the necessary components of the 2 CEPPT strategies and the targets and ranges. The benchmarks, if those are approved, those will be updated in the total fund policy in the future via an administrative update. So in terms of a recommendation and next steps, we are hoping to get approval for the 2 portfolios, the recommended targets, benchmarks, ranges, and the investment policy. And then if approved, we would continue with our setup work, launch by July 1st, and then we would fold the CEPPT into our ongoing affiliate trust reviews to the board. Those are our prepared remarks, and we're happy to take more questions.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Just want to thank you very much for the report. It was very clear for me. And I just also would like to reiterate Ms. Middleton's concern that we make sure there's an educational portion as we roll this out, so that we are keeping our employers informed.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Move approval.
It's been moved by Jones, seconded by Brown. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Oh, pardon me, you are correct. Mr. Gibbons, please come forward. Please give your name for the record, and you'll have up to 3 minutes for your comments. Sorry about that. I only wrote it in 3 places.
Chair, members of the committee, Dylan Gibbons with the California Special Districts Association. I'm glad that I know that I already have your support for this provision, but that's what I was going to be encouraging. I wanted to also just thank the board and the CalPERS staff for all of their work on this effort. The legislation that came through last year, SB 1413, truly was a team effort. It was something where we sat down and asked the board for assistance on providing a tool for our members to address upcoming increases in their pension costs, and this board came through with support for that legislation and assisted by giving staff the direction to work with us. So that this was an effort between employers, labor, and CalPERS, and now here we are about to roll this out. To Member Middleton's comments about rolling this out, we do look forward to partnering with CalPERS and educating our members and trying to get as many folks enrolled and knowledgeable on the program itself. We anticipate the same type of participation as in the CERP, and we're hopeful that this will be a true tool. To the question from Mr. Perez regarding, why a member may or may not get into this program, this tool will assist our membership in dealing with the fluctuations of rates. When they have a little extra money, they can put it into this fund, and then it'll help stabilize their payments into CalPERS in those years where maybe they have other concerns or other needs for on their general budget. They can draw down from this fund to offset any increase that they may receive from CalPERS in their annual payments. So with that, again, thank you for your support for this, and look forward to working with you and rolling it out.
Thank you for your comments. So again, that brings us to agenda item 10, summary committee direction. Mr. Meng, did you have anything to add?
We didn't note any directive from you, but we did note the request from many of you to come back with a communication plan on the drawdown, and we'll continue to inform you as we develop the plan.
Very good, thank you. Brings us to agenda item 11. I have 2 requests so far to speak, and a whole handful of people that aren't even here. I have Ms. Fanucci and Ms. Theis on the list so far. Would you please come forward? No, that's okay. Thank you. Please give your name for the record, and you'll have up to 3 minutes for your comments.
Yes, I'm Sarah Theis from Fossil Free California. Some of you are familiar with me and my organization. As I've said before, I'm also a CalPERS retiree. Myself and my organization are concerned about climate-related financial risk. So in that light, I thought I'd just bring to your attention, and you may have seen it, the latest developments in Norway. The Norway Parliament has instructed their sovereign wealth fund to pull about $13 billion in investments in coal, oil, and gas, and to move $20 billion, which is 2% of the fund, into renewables. And specifically, the funds will scrap investments worth about $7 billion in oil and gas production companies. Now, these are smaller companies that focus specifically on oil and gas, and they're retaining investments in some larger companies that are limiting exposure to fossil fuels by investing in renewables. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention. I think it's a sign of the times, and it's something worth talking to staff about. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we now have 11 or 12 requests to speak, looks like on the same topic. So I'll call down the first 3. Please give your name for the record. You'll have up to 3 minutes for your comments, and please don't repeat the comments from their predecessors. So let's bring new concepts when we come up and talk and not repeat one another, please. I have Ms. Fanucci, Ms. Olvera, and Mr. Austin. Are they here? Well, if you'd have put them in a different order, I could have, but that's what I got. So how would you like to put them in some sort of order? I just would recommend for future times, if you turn them in earlier and list them the way that you'd like them read, that's how we will present them. Over on this side, please. Yes, first 3 seats. Thank you. The microphones are already on for you. First 3.
There you go.
There you go.
Everybody else?
No, just the first 3 seats, please.
First 3 seats.
Excuse me. Just the first 3. There we go. Thank you. Please begin.
This one on?
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Cecil Canton. I'm a professor of criminal justice at California State University, Sacramento. I'm also a member of the California Faculty Association, which represents more than 29,000 professors, lecturers, coaches, counselors, and librarians in the Cal State system. I've been a CalPERS member for 28 years. I'm here today to speak to you about our union's call for this body to divest in private prisons that are committing egregious human rights violations. Private prisons whose sole purpose is to prosper for the mass incarceration of people of color and profit from the detainment of immigrants to our country. Private prisons that improve their bottom lines at the expense of our fellow human beings. I'm going to paint a picture for you of what transpires in places like ICE detention facilities owned and operated by the GEO Group. Refrigeration units filled with slimy lunch meat, moldy bread, and open packages of raw chicken leaking blood. Inadequate medical care, solitary confinement as a punitive and retaliatory measure, and nooses in detainee cells. This is not Orwellian fiction. This is reality for 5,000 people detained in just 4 of the GEO's group's ICE facilities, one of which is in Adelanto, California. These were among the findings contained in a report by the Office of the Inspector General released June 3rd. The report is a factual account of the horrific conditions that detainees face daily and is the 3rd report since Trump came into office, the findings of which are all consistent. It's shameful that there is even debate about whether CalPERS should continue to include GEO Group and Core Civic as part of its investment portfolio. I, along with my colleagues, do not want our pensions connected to these atrocities. In April, the California Faculty Association passed a resolution calling for CalPERS and its executive board to divest from the GEO Group and Core Civic. I want to read you a piece of that resolution. Core Civic and GEO Group are engaged in human rights abuses linked to their operation of the largest family detention centers in the country, where migrant children and adults are detained in life-threatening conditions, given contaminated or insufficient food, denied effective legal representation, denied basic medical support, forced to endure unsafe working conditions, forced labor and wage theft, denied access to communication outside the facility, and held in prolonged or indefinite detention. Core Civic and GEO Group have failed to improve conditions at their detention centers even after lawsuits, fines from government agencies, and scathing reports from the Office of the Inspector General, which is the Department of Homeland Security's oversight body. Consider this: the investment in these private prisons is a tiny fraction, just $11.4 million of CalPERS' overall investments, which is some $360 billion. That is de minimis to the overall portfolio return and profit. There is no good reason for continuing to allow our retirement pensions to be intertwined companies committed willfully negligent human rights abuses. CFA, and as part of CFA, we as faculty are committed to dismantling racism and social injustice that permeates the institutions, systems, and policies in California and our country. We will not back down from this fight. This is the wrong side of history.
Thank you. Your time has expired.
CalPERS, don't be on that side.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Kevin Weir. I'm a professor of sociology, also at Sacramento State, and I'm vice president of the California Faculty Association. I've been a CalPERS member for 17 years. As Dr. Canton mentioned, CFA passed a resolution in April calling for CalPERS to divest from Core Civic and the GEO Group. We sent that resolution to this body on May 16th. While we received a response dated May 24th, I'd like to counter several of the claims in your response about CalPERS policy and your philosophy regarding divestment. The letter states that investment, quote, does not signify that CalPERS approves of the company's policies, products, or action, end quote. This, to be very blunt, is a cop-out. It's a cop-out used to remain separate from any kind of moral culpability that may come from looking critically at who is being exploited for the sake of profit. And in this case, those being exploited are immigrant families. Your response further states that CalPERS, quote, wants companies it invests in to meet higher corporate governance, ethical, and social standards of conduct, end quote. In this case, however, divestment is the proper course of action. After Sandy Hook, CalPERS sold its stakes in 2 major gun manufacturers. We are simply asking you to do the same right thing in this instance as well. CoreCivic and GEO Group run private prisons and profit off of the unjust and racist laws that incarcerate innocent, undocumented immigrants. These organizations operate the largest family detention centers in the country, where the vast majority of detainees are seeking asylum. CoreCivic and GEO Group's business model and continued profitability relies on a system that is caging children. Their stock prices depend on violating the basic human rights of families fleeing violence in their home countries. These companies have seen an increase in demand for their services thanks to the broken system that is abusing them and violating their rights. The supply, in this case, being humans at the mercy of racist and xenophobic federal policies. CalPERS must divest. Nothing achieved through policy changes by these companies is enough. In fact, they can make no changes that will satisfy the kind of policy improvements that would facilitate continued investment in them. Everything CoreCivic and GEO Group does or can do to remain profitable is, at its very core, unjust. The New York City Pension Fund divested. So did New York State Common Retirement Fund. In November 2018, CalSTRS divested. And now JP Morgan stopped financing the private prison industry, and Wells Fargo is following suit. And yet CalPERS continues its investment in this corrupt system. I am here as a professor who has dedicated my career to lifting up understanding and knowledge and generating future generations of thought leaders. I'm here as part of CFA, a faculty union deeply committed to racial and social justice. And I'm here as a CalPERS member who finds it reprehensible that this pension that I will rely on for my retirement, this is my final sentence, the pension that I will rely on for my retirement is invested in funding human rights abuses. Please divest and dump CoreCivic and GEO Group. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Nisha Fritz. I'm a member of the California Faculty Association. We are here in coalition with Educators for Migrant Justice, and I would like to cede my time to Emily Goldman with Educators for Migrant Justice.
Well, we can't secede your time, but that's okay. Next.
Hi, my name is Amy Schreck. I'm with the California Faculty Association, and I'm also here in support of the coalition and Educators for Migrant Justice, and I'm in support of the comments that my colleagues just gave. I'd also be happy to cede my time just to one of the speakers who would need some more time.
It's just 3 minutes per person. We can't give them extra time, but thank you. Next person, please.
Hi, my name is Janeth Rodriguez. I'm with the California Faculty Association. I would also just like to echo the comments made by my colleagues and would willingly cede my time for any of the other speakers. Thank you.
Okay, and I don't have a request for you to speak. Could you please fill one out so the court reporter can have it?
Sure. Thank
you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Vincent Savasco, also with the California Faculty Association, here in support of their call for divestment. And if seating is possible, we'll cede my time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is it my turn? Hi, my name is Joanne, and I am here to echo all of the...
Please give your full name.
Joanne Finucci.
Thank you.
I'm here to echo all of the remarks that the coalition has brought to your attention with the divestment. I was here 2 weeks ago on fossil fuel divestment, which I've been doing for 3 years, and we need to join forces because we're after the same goal. I don't mean to be unkind, but I do have a comment regarding all of your graphs. I've been here for several hours. All of your graphs and charts and all of that. And I would really appreciate seeing a chart for risk-reward ratios that have the number of families detained illegally on the border. I would love to see a chart, well, not love, but I would like to see a chart graphing the number of rapes, sexual assaults, and other attacks against women and children in detention. I would like to see the number of murders on these charts so that you can weigh the risk and ratio rewards on another level besides what's in it for me. I really, again, I don't mean to be unkind, but you need to see the whole picture. This was a very dry presentation. Stay the course in the downturn, which is going to happen in 2020, according to the Duke University professor's interview today. You really have a lot of work to do. I understand it's very hard, but at the same time, staying the course is not going to work. So when you get that graph together with all the atrocities being committed in this country's name, would you email it to me? I'd be happy to leave my email address with the people back there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hello. My name is Dr. Tristan Josephson. I'm also a CalPERS member, and I'm an assistant professor in the Women's Studies Department at Cal State Sacramento. I'm here, like with my colleagues, to express my concern about CalPERS complicity in the ongoing migrant abuse by for-profit prison companies, and I, in solidarity with my colleagues, urge you to divest my retirement funds from CoreCivic and Geo Group. The reason I'm particularly concerned is this is actually part of my academic research. I'm writing a book on trans migrants who come to the U.S. and their experiences with the immigration system, and part of my work is on what happens in detention centers. So I'm well aware of the decades-long abuses that have been extensively documented by human rights organizations and immigrant justice organizations in the U.S. Immigration detention facilities. I particularly focus on what happens to trans folks in these situations. So all migrants, as my colleagues have mentioned, are subjected to various sorts of abuses in these they're basically immigrant prisons. Trans folks, particularly transgender women, are especially vulnerable in these centers, right? And a really horrible example, a sort of extreme but actually routine example of this is the recent death of Roxana Hernandez Rodriguez in May of last year, who was held, a trans woman who was held in a facility in New Mexico that was run by CoreCivic, who died as a result of her incarceration. The New York Times reported that an autopsy after her death showed signs of abuse that she had sustained in the facility. And other trans women who have been released from that same facility, which is a Cibola County Correctional Center run by CoreCivic, have also testified to inadequate medical care, poor mental health services, the arbitrary use of segregation, which makes trans folks more vulnerable to abuse. And this is nothing new. These, as I said, these documented abuses have been going on for decades. One of the cases that I write about in my research is a case of another trans woman from Mexico in 2007 who died in immigrant prison in Southern California. So as my colleague Kevin Ware pointed out, these are folks who are entering the U.S. under under U.S. law and under international human rights law to declare asylum, right? And so this is a right that's guaranteed to them, and they're being treated in these ways. So I don't want my retirement funds invested in these companies. I would also argue the financial bit of this is, CalPERS investment in CoreCivic and Geo Group is a relatively small number of the larger portfolio that CalPERS have. So I'm just here to urge CalPERS to live up to its reputation as a leader in responsible investing and to take immediate action to end its financial complicity in these human rights abuses. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Dr. Melanie Sake, and I'm a staff member at Sacramento State University. I'm also the logistics coordinator of a group that we formed on campus, queer and trans faculty and staff. The short is QTFAST, and like my colleagues, I also support the divestment from the detention centers, as well as family separation. And I want to speak about the conditions of the centers, especially considering what's happening to trans detainees a little bit further. It's been coming out lately that the detention centers are really thought of as being very similar to concentration camps. And I have a PhD in art history of the early 20th century, specializing in queer and gender studies, and having studied extensively concentration camps during World War II, including, in Nazi Germany, the U.S. Japanese internment camps, I found the detention centers to be, there's a striking similarity between the detention centers and concentration camps. Andrea Pitzer, a journalist and author of the book One Long Night, A Global History of Concentration Camps, defines concentration camps as mass detention of civilians without a trial. So I want to speak to the detention of trans women in particular, because this is a very personal issue for myself, not just because of my research, but I identify as non-binary, and I have numerous loved ones who are also trans. And I've been reading about the horrors, trans women who are being placed into facilities for men, no medical care. So that means that they're denied their hormones, which is a deep violation of human dignity to anyone who is trans. And then, of course, the two trans women who were reported as dead, who were both HIV positive but were refused medical care. In a recent interview with two former detainees, they expressed some of the atrocities. One was chained to a pole in a men's facility for multiple hours while the men detainees were watching her and taunting her. And of course, several have been placed into solitary confinement. And these are, of course, asylum seekers. They're not criminals. How is this issue even up for debate? I love my job at Sac State, and the reason why I love it so much is because of its dedication to supporting diverse populations. So this is not part of our values. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next?
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Olvera, and I have been with PERS as a state employee for since 1968, Department of Industrial Relations. Right now I'm representing an organization that I work with in the Oakland Bay area called Freedom for Immigrants. Wanted to start out, there's some things that I'm going to repeat, but I've got a presentation here. I didn't have time to take it out, so I wouldn't repeat, so bear with me. But I wanted to start out with asking you if you remember the 60s. Do you remember the anti-war demonstrations? I can kind of look at some of you and know that you do, and that you hopefully participated in that. Well, there's a song by Buffalo Springfield. There's something happening here. What is it? Ain't exactly clear. It's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Let me tell you what's going down. PERS investing with Core Civic, a for-profit private company that owns and manages private prisons and detention centers. You've already heard that. So let's look at one of its hundreds of operations at the Cibola Immigrant Detention Center in Grants, New Mexico. While the immigrant population detained in Cibola have often committed no crime, they live in conditions fit for no human. The 1,100-bed detention center is notorious nationally for unlivable conditions, health violations, solitary confinement, and prison labor. Asylum seekers at Cibola face indefinite detention. Remember, no crime. Historically, political asylum seekers detained at Cibola were being categorically denied parole regardless of their circumstances. Detainees spend an average of 6 to 8 months in Cibola, and some stays last over a year. Remember, most have committed no crime. Health violations. Cibola accumulated more repeat deficiencies in health services than any other private federal prison in operation. A 2012 report found that Cibola was operating without a single doctor. The lack of access to health care has often resulted in death. Labor violations and inhumane treatment. Detainees work for unbelievably low wages. Inmates often work for only $1 a day. The cost of one phone call for 3 minutes is $10. This is a tremendous obstacle to obtaining important evidence for their cases. CoreCivic has upwards of 100 contracts with the U.S. Immigration, with the Department of Homeland Security, and many operate in the same heinous, dehumanizing fashion. They get away with it because they operate secretly.
Your time has expired.
Like the military, and many times. I have one more sentence. By the way, does all this sound familiar to you? These same inhumane conditions early on under Hitler were called concentration camps. Rest of the sentence, you may balk at this term. That's good. You should balk. But more than that, you should refuse to have anything to do with these money-making for-profit death camps. PERS in this country should have nothing to do with CoreCivic. Divest now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Josh Austin. I'm a teacher in Berkeley. I'm a public school teacher, member of Berkeley Federation of Teachers and California Federation of Teachers and Educators for Migrant Justice. I'm a CalSTRS member. My medical benefits are through CalPERS. I call on you to divest from CoreCivic and GEO Group. CalPERS is claiming to be a progressive institution. There's nothing progressive about investing in CoreCivic and GEO Group. You've heard about the human rights abuses. We are well aware of what's going on. There's no reason, there's no excuse for this. Financially, divesting from CoreCivic and GEO Group, maybe that is the language that you'll understand. In response to the company's conduct, CalPERS' fiduciary duty, given the level of risks in these investments, it poses a threat to CalPERS' rate of returns. According to a recent report from Norway's government pension fund, conduct-based investment from companies with serious or systematic human rights violations produces higher returns for investors. The California State Teachers Retirement System, CalSTRS, divested from CoreCivic and GEO Group in November after determining that owning private prison companies was detrimental to the overall portfolio return and tracking error. Compared to CalPERS, which oversees $360 billion and currently has $11.4 million invested in CoreCivic and GEO Group, CalSTRS oversees just $219 billion and is considered its $13.7 million investments in CoreCivic and GEO Group a drop in the bucket and a rounding error. Those are quotes. The material risks posed by CoreCivic and GEO Group's human rights abuses are already affecting both companies' bottom line, with their stock prices tumbling after JP Morgan and Wells Fargo announced plans to stop providing loans to either company due to their treatment of migrants and other detainees. So again, as a member of CalSTRS and CalPERS, I call on you to divest holdings in for-profit prison companies CoreCivic and GEO Group, and to use your leverage to pressure General Dynamics and United Rentals and their subsidiaries to provide access to redress for those adversely impacted by their operations, and to end your material support for the detention of migrant children and families. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Mancias. I'm a public stakeholder. I am a Divest campaign organizer for the women's group Code Pink. And I just want to share a story with you that I am the product and the result of a family who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border, who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border for better economic advances. I am here on the backs of my ancestors who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border. Things were different when they crossed. There was no General Dynamics. There was no Geo Group. There was no Core Civic. So it's my responsibility, and perhaps others in this room, to speak out against the atrocities that are happening on the U.S.-Mexico border. My family wasn't separated. We were kept together. We were able to build a new life for future generations. So I am here as a result of that and took full advantage of all their sacrifices. General Dynamics, a U.S. defense contractor specializing in missile defense systems and combat vehicles, is currently under contract with the Department of Health and Human Services for infrastructure services for shelter care for unaccompanied children at the Florida Homestead facility. United Rentals, one of the largest rental companies, is also providing rental equipment and infrastructure to this facility. We've all heard Core Civic and Geo Group operate the largest family detention centers in the U.S., where the vast majority of detainees are seeking asylum. My family in the past sought asylum, and we got it. Plaintiffs in 6 federal lawsuits have alleged forced labor and other human rights abuses in Core Civic and Geo Group's facilities. According to independent medical experts, Core Civic and Geo Group's practices have contributed to the deaths of numerous detainees, and advocacy groups continue to voice concerns over medical neglect and sexual abuse at the company's migrant detention centers. A recent report by the Department of Homeland Security's internal watchdog concluded that ICE's detention facilities, including those operated by Core Civic and Geo Group, are not subject to rigorous oversight and therefore are not held accountable for substandard conditions. This conclusion is all the more alarming given that the current administration, the Trump administration, has sought to terminate standards that prevent children from being held in Core Civic and Geo Group family detention facilities for prolonged periods of time. Nearly a year after his zero tolerancy immigration policy was first announced.
Expired.
Oh, thank you for your time.
Thank you. So I have 2 other requests to speak, Ms. Berta Avila and Ms. Goldman. Guess it's just Ms. Goldman.
Yes, my name is Emily Claire Goldman. I'm the founder and director of Educators for Migrant Justice. I'm going to keep it short since we've had quite a few public comments, and I know that you all have heard quite a bit from me. I first wanted to share a few updates. First of all, AB 32, the California legislation that would prohibit the state from contracting with Core Civic and Geo Group, has passed the state assembly, is on to the Senate and set for hearing on July 2nd. It is expected to pass. This is very significant for both companies. In one of Core Civic's most recent SEC filings, they noted that the mere reduction in California's prison population cost them $14 million over 1 year. Just a reduction in their prison population. This bill alone would have a devastating effect on both companies. The conduct by both companies, as everyone else has noted, is also affecting their bottom line. The human rights abuses recently led the city of Indianapolis to cancel its contracts with Core Civic, as well as the Federal Bureau of Prisons to cancel its Adams County Correctional Facility, which alone generated $60 million in revenue for the company. Moreover, going back to the California prison population reduction, that alone affected Core Civic's share price and dropped it by a couple cents per share, which overall is quite significant. Again, just the mere reduction. Also want to note that, again, when we're talking about engaging with companies, it should be good faith engagement. And what we've seen in a recent class action securities lawsuit against CoreCivic, we have the judge that previously refused to certify the class action, several weeks later went back and ended up certifying it after finding a discord between what CoreCivic CEO was telling shareholders and what corporate employees themselves knew when CoreCivic employees were given an advance copy of a 2016 report from the Office of the Inspector General. One executive wrote, "What I'm shocked is that they totally overlooked the consequences of our staff vacancies. The company has settled at least 3 lawsuits stemming from understaffing at their facilities for undisclosed sums, with one pending class action lawsuit alleging that understaffing at CoreCivic's Truesdale Turner facility put diabetic prisoners' lives at risk. The judge's ruling in the securities litigation also cited a CoreCivic executive who was, quote, worried that healthcare problems might be putting contracts in jeopardy at 2 facilities and wrote in an email, quote, this is going to kill us. It's important for the board to keep that in mind as you continue the engagement process. Much of this information has been provided to each of you in a report that I emailed just 30 minutes ago.
Your time has expired, Ms. Goldman.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other requests from the public, I do have one board member request. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. I wanted to thank our California Faculty Association folks for showing up. I've spoken on this on a couple of occasions. These corporations displace our workers, state workers, in prisons. I disagree with the business model in general, but I will assure you that we are discussing this. We are discussing the impact. So thank you again.
Thank you. Ms. Middleton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank California Faculty Association for coming. Currently, SB 132 from Senator Scott Wiener is in the legislature. It would define a number of practices that would be prohibited in California prisons when it comes to the treatment and assignment of transgender individuals. I would like to have staff contact both GEO Group and CoreCivic and get a specific answer to their willingness to follow the precepts of SB 132 and to ensure that transgender people in their custody are treated with dignity and are treated in conformity with their gender identity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I thank you for your comments. And in particular, I want to thank the presenters for, in your comments, you recognize that we are here as fiduciaries. And some of your comments I find are very helpful to me as a fiduciary because, as I've expressed before, I think there are, as Ms. Taylor has well, there are serious problems with their business model. There are serious problems that from a hardcore financial Wall Street investor, long-term strategic investor, we need to look at as whether they're evil, whether they're angels, doesn't really matter in that context. It's, is this a smart investment? Is their business model going to survive? Are they going to hurt us in our ability to provide and support the fund that provides the benefits for our members? And that's where I think some of your comments that went to the relevance of them as an investment, as a business model, as having exposure to real serious liabilities from their behaviors that may be deplorable, but are also material and financially relevant to their ability as an investment to support where we need to go with this challenge of our funding. So I appreciate that some of the comments recognize that that's the perspective we have to look at it from. And to that extent that you did, that was helpful to me. So thank you.
Thank you. So you know the request. We thank you all for coming today and for your comments. This open session is adjourned. We will open and close session at 1:45.